cut out anything that's extraneous at the beginning. Well, here we are in Tampa, Florida at a police training conference, and I thought I'd take a few minutes to record this video for your Unit 7 discussion board takeaways. Now, the first question I had you deal with was to evaluate Ebola as a bioterrorist threat. And based on the responses that I've read from you so far, y'all did a really good job of evaluating it as a potential terrorist threat and some of the implications associated with our civil liberties. But here's the key points I want you to take away. Number one, Ebola is definitely a potential terrorist weapon if it falls into the wrong hands. I mean, suicide bombers can easily turn into suicide infectors. I mean, think about the potential. Think about a political Islamist terrorist or terrorist group sending someone that might otherwise be willing to be a suicide bomber to West Africa to deliberately infect themselves with the Ebola virus. Now, particularly dangerous would be if this person has a U.S. passport or a passport to some other Western nation. They fly back into the U.S., let's say, infected with the Ebola virus with instructions to reinfect as many other people as they possibly can. And they know their time is short. Maybe they got a 14-day window or so for them to be contagious and for the disease to run its course before they die. And they go out and they cough on, spit on, bleed on, whatever, as many potential victims as they possibly can. Now, the panic associated with such an attack, even if the attack itself was unsuccessful in infecting large numbers of people, because many of y'all brought out the fact that Ebola might not be quite as contagious as we might be led to believe, although we also know that viruses can mutate. We don't know what the long-term implications are. But be that as it may, even if large numbers are not infected, the ensuing panic of such an attack would be a victory for the terrorists, within itself. And such an attack, or even the threat of such an attack, has huge implications for civil liberties when it comes to things like forced quarantines, mandatory inoculations. And we're already seeing some of that making the news already as we're dealing with this virus. Now, as Dr. Ben Carson points out, no matter how effective your safety protocols are, you can never discount human error when it comes to handling a dangerous biohazard such as Ebola. So it's very timely in terms of recent events, and I encourage you to keep an eye on this as it continues to unfold. Now, the second question dealt with Sharia law, and I had you deal with some examples of Sharia law so that, number one, you would better understand its threat to civil liberties since the establishment of a worldwide caliphate and global implementation of Sharia law is a stated goal of political Islam. And number two, so that you would understand why it's a bad idea to introduce Sharia law into American jurisprudence. Our First Amendment rights protect our freedom to worship as we choose, to freely associate, and to voluntarily submit ourselves to the jurisdiction and control of others. However, there are limits. I can agree voluntarily to subject myself to church discipline, for example, or to a club's membership rules, or to the homeowners association covenants. And I can also voluntarily remove myself from all those jurisdictions at will. But even in a scenario where all parties to a legal action agree, Sharia law should not be considered within the American legal system. Muslims are free to submit themselves to the dictates of Sharia law if they would like, within the context of their community, their mosque, their family. But it must be on a voluntary basis and not coerced, and not practiced in a way that imposes on the rights of others or places them in